Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's weekly podcast series, Israel Insider. My name is Anaf Kalam, and I will be moderating today's discussion. We're pleased to be joined today by Alex Selsky, who is the Senior Advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel Victory Project, and he joins us each week to give us a top overview of the current events going on in Israel this week. Mr. Selsky will speak for 15 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A session from the audience. And if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And with that, I will turn the discussion over to Mr. Alex Selsky.
No, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to start from a few words of um, I was very glad to see people on the Middle East Forum annual policy conference last week in Washington. And I met a few people who told me that they are listening to the podcasts of Israel Insider, including mine. And first of all, I was really happy to hear that there are people that really listen every week, and many people that said that this is important for them and that we're doing it really good. So I was really glad. So thank you, and please stay with us. And we're happy that it helps you and gives you information. So, well, this week is, as always, a very, very not boring week in Israel. A very intense, and things really, run so fast and change every hour, really every hour. Just during the last few hours, so many things happened. So I will give you a summary, for now. It doesn't mean that until, this podcast will be uploaded to the YouTube, things will stay the same. I'm sure that they will not, that that many things will change, but Israel as Israel, always full of news, and definitely these days. So I chose four major issues to present to you that happen now. First of all, definitely first and foremost, the situation with the war in Gaza, and a few very significant historic things happen now and happen during the last few days. So first of all, let's start from the fact that for the first time, um, American company together with Israel called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation made organized food stations for Gazans, which its goal was to prevent from Hamas to steal this humanitarian aid. And it partly succeeded. And it was in the beginning when this station started to work. It was four stations in Gaza, and thousands of people came to pick the food. And despite the attempts of Hamas to prevent from the people to come to the stations, and when people came and it started to work, many started to say, this is the end of Hamas. This is the proof that Hamas starts to, to lose the control over the population. Uh, I don't know. We saw people, shouting Trump, Trump. I'm sure that it's very, it's a good success for America that, comes and helps with the humanitarian aid, and it looks very well for America, and it looks like, Israel is so cruel that it's not helping Gazans. But unfortunately, the problem is not, I mean, the challenge is to prevent from Hamas to control this humanitarian aid. Everybody in Israel would like, to give people food, definitely to people that are uninvolved. But there are two very, very big problems and challenges with this. First, that we know that every humanitarian aid before this one just went to Hamas, and Hamas not only took it for itself, Hamas sold it with very high prices to Gazans. And this is one. And second, it's a very, very hard question: who is uninvolved population in Gaza? Because we do know that many of the people who work and go with civil clothes and look as regular citizens, they are involved in Hamas and they participate in the battles and in the wars. So it's two very, very big challenges. And many in Israel say, how come you give humanitarian aid to finally to Hamas, to your enemy? Okay, it's like, think of it like, okay, like England would have been sending humanitarian aid to Nazi Germany, knowing that the Nazi regime would take this aid and use it for its need. So it was really big criticism, and unfortunately, I think that many people in the world don't understand that Israel doesn't have any intention to prevent humanitarian aid or to hurt the people, the uninvolved people, and to cause suffering. Just Israel doesn't want to help Hamas in the war. But I also have to say that I am skeptic about, that it brought a, many say that this is the game changer where, we see the end of Hamas. I don't think so. I think that people just, the fact that people came and took food doesn't mean that Hamas loses control. We already saw demonstrations in Gaza of those who said, that Hamas should, leave and were against Hamas. I don't think that this is something that shows really that Hamas loses control. If there is something that shows that Hamas loses control, is Israeli military pressure and the assassination of Mohammed Sinwar. This, I think, something again, more pressure, more we see that people in Gaza feel freer to express anti-Hamas spirit. But again, I wouldn't give too much credit for that and saying that it shows that Hamas loses control. This is one. Second, we see that the Trump's representative Witkoff speaks now these days, really today, about a possibility of a deal. And there's a big mess with it because much of briefings from all sides, Israel says that, we will not agree to a deal that ends the war because that will keep Hamas on control. Hamas speaks about partial release of hostages. Israel says that no partial, we will not agree until all the hostages are out. This is very not first time when we heard so much talks about possible deals, so I would be skeptical as well here and say, when we'll see the deal, I'll tell you there is a deal. When we hear about the deal, I cannot tell you there is a deal because this is really not the first time. So I'm very skeptical at the moment, and I know that Netanyahu so far stands the pressure and doesn't let the war over. Opposite. We just a couple of days ago, the Knesset approved another draft of hundreds of thousands of reserve soldiers and officers. I can tell that I'm in reserve the whole week in Homefront Command, and we see that the army is very active in preparing to any possible shift and direction of this war. Um, Another thing that must be touched is Iran. We hear today that Trump openly says that he asked Netanyahu not to strike Iran, which openly proves what we heard before, that Trump didn't let Israel strike Iran and stopped Israel from attacking Iran. And we hear about a very tense phone conversation between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And again, many, many different briefings from every side. But one thing is very clear, that Trump administration continues to talk to Iran and progresses with the negotiations And Israelis are not happy because all the talks about maximum pressure and hitting Iran and understanding that Iran is the worst actor in the Middle East, and the understanding that Iran is the exporter, together with Qatar, the exporter of the terror and anti-American propaganda on American soil. Where is all that? Many people question, and when I was in last week in Washington, many people, were discussing it and questioning it. How come? What happened to Trump, and what's exactly happening? Is it some trick, or he's serious? But more and more we hear briefings from the White House. They prove and show that the pressure of Trump is real. Again, I have many commentaries about that. I hope that Trump understands that he has to put pressure. And again, he speaks about no uranium enrichment. So we see the gaps, and we hear from Iranians that they say that, no way that we will agree to that, and no way that agreement will come to, to signature if these are the conditions. But I hope we all will see very soon that it's some kind of trick that Trump had to do because of, I had some assumption that maybe because of the negotiations with China, which are maybe more important for Trump and for White House. So he tries to, put the Iranian negotiations, on hold a bit and not to piss off Chinese. Very maybe, we shall see. Um, Under that, I just can tell that today we heard for the first time that the laser air defense system Iron Beam already is active and successful. So Israel more and more prepares and gets closer to the possibility to intercept every missile and rocket threats, which will be very possible in a few years, which are very good news for Israel in this situation. Another very, very important issue that I want to touch, two small political issues, because it's Israel. We cannot live without politics. And so instability in the government over the Haredi draft bill. Again and again, we see more tension, more pressure from the Haredi leadership to at least threaten that they will leave the government if the bill will not pass soon. We hear that Netanyahu calls to Yulia Edelstein, who is the head of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, which has to prepare the law for the last votes. And so we hear that Netanyahu calls Edelstein and tries, to press on him. We also hear that Netanyahu tries to promote some kind of a media reform, which is important for some of the Likud members of Knesset that oppose to the draft bill. So he tries to put some trade-off and to, please those within Likud who oppose to the Haredi draft bill by promoting this media reform. Let's see if this will succeed. I still think that Haredi leadership understands well that they don't have a better government. Even though we heard a couple of weeks ago, one of the chief rabbis in Israel said that, why we why we always go with the right-wing government. What did they give to us? Maybe we go with the left-wing government and maybe we get more. Well, I want to, first of all, to remind you that in 99, when Barak was the prime minister, Shas entered the government, entered the coalition, took the money for the educational system, and then left. So Haredi can, and not theoretically only, participate to take part in left-wing coalition and cooperate with them well if they get what they want, and the draft bill is something that they want. I doubt, though, that the center-left Zionist Israelis will be able to give to the ultra-Orthodox, to Haredi leadership what they want. So I still don't think that They have better government, so I really doubt that they will really leave this coalition and not just thread. But again, let's see. And the last thing, also very important to mention at the last minute that I have, is the appointment or attempt to appoint Major General David Zini to the head of the Shin Bet Shabak, Israeli security agency, which becomes very political again because the government legal advisor says that Netanyahu has a conflict of interest because of the so-called Qatar Gate investigation by Shin Bet. So he cannot now appoint a new Shin Bet head, but those who support the appointment say, "Nah, come on, this is not about the conflict of interest. It's about the fact that David Zini is a religious guy from the periphery with 11, if I'm not mistaken, children, and this will, help Netanyahu to control even more the security system, and the confrontation is purely political. So that's the situation. These are the main issues happening in Israel. We are at 16 minutes after 3, so please, your question. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Alex. Now, going back to the situation that you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks, I have a video in front of me. It comes from Abdul Rahman Ismail on Twitter, and it is a video of Gazans storming a Hamas warehouse where they find that it's actually stocked with food, and so in response, Hamas has opened fire and killed at least five. Now, there have been similar incidents over the last few days. Do you think that these incidents might help to sway the PR war in the West against Hamas, especially since in the same time period it looks like the Hamas propaganda or the Pallywood propaganda has been going out full force?
So good question, but again, I'm sorry for my skepticism. I think that I said that I'm skeptical too many times this podcast, but this is not the first time, you understand? We saw demonstrations. We saw Gazans that spoke against Hamas a few months after the war. We saw Arabic, Saudi, and Emiratis and Moroccan uh, significant leadership spoke against Hamas. But all these voices, I think, are nothing in comparison to this huge reach um, machine of propaganda financed by Qatar and Iran that we discussed it on our conference that the West became the center of radical Islam, and the money that it puts there is so big. So, and people believe this because it fits their anti-Semitic and anti-West and anti-American and some ideology and some personal also feelings and spirits and the left and the woke. So I really would like to think that it will help. I'm sure it will help if it will really change and shift. We need much, much, much more, and we don't see yet much, much more. And unfortunately, at this stage, I don't see change. I see pressure of Germany on Israel, stop fighting. Don't you understand that Europe is sinking? And instead of helping us to fight the threat, you're threatening us. So that's the answer, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And to add to that, just as Israel is fighting a actual physical war on multiple fronts, it seems like they're now facing a PR war on multiple fronts against the
It's propaganda. It's propaganda war.
right, right. So, you have the typical anti-Semites, the Islamists, the woke left, who we now call the woke right, and multiple fronts. And as you say, it's very hard to keep up
And
with
it's
a lot.
economic. It's economic interest that, again, we spoke about it a lot on the conference. big money stands behind the war against Israel and America, and Israel as American ally. Big money of Qatar, Iran, Russia, China, and all of them, and Turkey as well for gas export and so on and so on, and shipments. And and they will not give up easily.
Of course. Now, moving on to another topic here. Our executive director, Greg Roman, wrote over the weekend that the window is closing and strikes on Iranian nuclear reactors may come in days and not weeks, as we once thought. Can you talk about what might happen if these strikes take place, and also what might happen if the window closes and Iran is successful in enriching weapons-grade fissile material?
Well, two very big questions. Well, first of all, I spoke about it briefly first in my presentation of the first part. Yes, definitely. The window is very. This opportunity is almost disappearing as we hear more and more. And just few hours earlier, the statements of President Trump that he progresses with the negotiations, that he's told to Netanyahu not to attack. Now, maybe it's some, game that, he plays the good guy, Netanyahu plays the. I really hope so. I really hope so. But so far, while we play with the Iranians, they're so well in, doing things slowly and reaching their goals successfully. Okay, and Trump himself said, right, that nobody yet won over Iran in negotiations, right? Persians are known for very good skills of negotiations, and they are there 3,000 years of history. So for them, another 5, 10 years of bluffing with us and getting nuclear weapon is something very easy. Now, what will happen if they get a nuclear weapon? I think the worst case scenario that a tactical nuclear weapon can reach the proxies, which we don't succeed to destroy, not Houthis and not Hamas, and even Hezbollah, which, dies. It looks like it dies slowly and surely, but it's still, maybe not on its feet, but definitely not dead in the grave, right? So, and then another proxy can wake up in Africa again. I spoke about it, in my talk in the panel in the Washington conference that, they're very good. And, we have Africa here, with Sudan and other nice neighbors. So, uh, you know, America used nuclear weapons, guys, So we cannot, Americans are not those who might say that nobody will use nuclear weapons. Now, this is not the same case, definitely, but you cannot say that all those who try to reach nuclear weapons are those who will never use it. So I don't want to frighten too much, but and also they will, when you have a nuclear weapon, you behave differently because nuclear weapon, even if you don't use it, it gives you this umbrella of, self-security and self-esteem in every field in economy and culture. Look, like, Russia, which is very, after all, weak economically. Okay, Russian GDP is less than Italy. People think that, Russia is one of the biggest economies on earth. No, it's not. It's 11th, if I remember, GDP at the moment, but it behaves so, you know, brutal. It presents so brutal behavior. First of all, because it was a superpower, right? But also because it's a nuclear superpower, and people understand that if you piss them off too much, they might use it, And people remember Cuba in 62, right? So you cannot say that any nuclear power will never use it. And also remember that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, other countries will want. Saudis speak about it today openly that, no way that they get it. And we spoke about it when we spoke about India and Pakistan. Now, India and Pakistan already both have nuclear weapon, but there are many others who might want at the moment that Iran will get it because they're the immediate suspects for receiving these rockets. So Saudis and Emiratis and Egyptians and others will also want, and it's going to be a very dangerous race. Even if it's not going to be used, the motivation and the drive of being much more violent on the international arena, that's also big danger.
Right. It's often said that if you like what comes out of the Middle East now, you're going to love what's going to come out when they're all nuclear armed powers. But you bring up a good point that is often overlooked. We figure we know how a nation state like Iran would behave if it were to obtain nuclear weapons, but we don't often think of the same deterrent principles if a non-state actor like a proxy or a terrorist organization that isn't bound to these nuclear norms and nuclear laws, if the Houthis or if Hezbollah or even, even if Hamas were to get a tactical nuclear weapon, they wouldn't be bound by the same rules, whereas they're already threatened with total extermination.
And I still claim, and I had arguments on that in Washington with the knowledgeable people, but I spoke about it also with the former Yemeni foreign minister. I am sure, and I can show proof to that, that maybe Russians don't operate Houthis, but they definitely give approval and support. And we know that they gave much of support to Houthis through Iranians. So Russians, they really enjoy the situation by sabotaging the shipment routes of the Red Sea, and and Russians will back Iranians if they will provide Houthis with a tactical nuclear weapon. And we see that Houthis are very dangerous. So it's not a joke, guys.
Right, of course, of course. Now, I'm going to move on here to a question from David Levine, who asks, the U.S. Cabinet Secretary was in Israel this week and was very evasive in describing the conversations she had with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Do you happen to have any additional information as to what really happened?
I was not in the meeting, so I cannot add, but we see lots of briefing about this call. I touched it previously that we see that it was something. I speak about the call with Trump, but the other meetings, excuse me, as well. And now, I don't know, again, maybe, very maybe, and I want to be optimistic and assume that maybe it's a game of, bad cop and good cop, and, Israel briefs the media that it was a tough call because it's good interest for Netanyahu, and Trump briefs the media that it was tough call because he wants, to show Iranians and Chinese and all others that he presses Israel. Everything is possible. It's very, very complex game, and I don't buy all those who say, no, come on, Trump is not as sophisticated. Guys, he was elected twice to be American president. He is sophisticated. Okay, even with all the criticism you have, okay, and also president is not a person. President is an institution, and the institution, American institution of the White House, is something you cannot underestimate. So maybe it's a game. Netanyahu is very sophisticated, and Israel can be sophisticated, and maybe it's not. Very, very unfortunately, once a very prominent Israeli politician, not politician, head of staff of Ariel Sharon said that, if you have to choose between very complex and sophisticated conspiracy and, excuse my French, stupidity, from my long experience, it usually is the second. Maybe, but I have also experience with, politics being an advisor of the prime minister, and I can tell you but that in many times can be also very sophisticated game. I hope we see a game and not real pressure on Netanyahu. And if Israel will need to strike, it will strike, and America will support us because they understand the threat. I really hope, and I'm not the only one to have this hope in Israel.
Right, right. As you say, these sort of questions of existential threats transcend politics, I hope. Now, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our podcast for this week. I want to thank you again, Alex, for taking the time to update us.
Thank you very much, and let us hear only good news.
Hopefully, hopefully from here on out. Now, for
Thank you for all that listen to us. Thank you.
Yes, for our viewers and listeners, we thank you all again for tuning in and subscribing every week for these updates. I was able to meet many of you in person in Washington, D.C., and it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure hearing your feedback. It's always welcome, of course. Now, please join us tomorrow as we are hosting our Middle East Forum Roundtable event at 11:30 a.m. on the topic of stealth jihad and Islamists in the West. The information is on our website, and you can register for that event. Hope to see you all there. And as always, I thank you for your participation and your viewership.